Fethullah Gulen, the man accused of orchestrating Turkey's bloody coup attempt. How did this businessman and cleric go from the leader of a seemingly peaceful religious organisation to the alleged mastermind of an attempt to overthrow Turkey's government? In the late 1960s and early 1970s, Gulen began making a name for himself as a passionate preacher. During a time when many openly practicing Muslims were denied representation in public life, Gulen encouraged his followers to get jobs in the military, police, judiciary and civilian bureaucracy to gain influence from the inside. The movement also funded private, high-quality schools and encouraged followers to start businesses. In the 1990s, the group expanded its activities beyond Turkey, running hundreds of schools and cultural centres, seemingly spreading Turkish culture and influence and promoting interfaith dialogue and charity. But the Turkish state says it's now clear Gulen's motives were more sinister, infiltrating institutions to gain control of state apparatus and investing overseas to gain favour with Western powers. Part of the ultimate endgame of taking power, something Fethullah Gulen categorically denies. In 2013, Gulenists were accused of manufacturing evidence in a corruption investigation targeting AK Party members and President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's inner circle. Erdogan described it as an attempt at a judicial coup by a parallel authority within the state. In July 2016, shortly before the failed coup, a local court convicted Gulen and his followers of forming an armed terrorist organisation, FETÖ, drawing its members from within the army and police in order to overthrow the Turkish government. Fethullah Gulen denies any involvement in July 15th's coup attempt. But the Turkish government says much of the evidence against him lies in who was caught red-handed. On the night of the coup, well-known Gulenists were caught or known to have been at key sites. Theology professor Adil Oksus, thought to be one of the main coup plotters, was taken into custody near Akinci Air Base on the night of the coup. Security camera footage also shows another civilian and known Gulenist, Kemal Batmas, at the Akinci Air Base on the night of the coup. Just days before the coup, Oksus and Batmas travelled on the same flight back from the US. On the night of the coup, plotters took over TRT broadcast, forcing the presenter to read a statement.
Türk Silahlı Kuvvetleri daha güçlü bir ilişki ve işbirliğini tesis etmek maksadıyla yönetime el koymuştur.
Security footage also shows other known Gulen associates fleeing the TRT building in Ankara on the morning of July 16th. Gulenists were also found to be directly involved in the evening's combat, with a police officer, once dismissed because of suspected Gulen links, Mithat Aynanca, caught by civilians inside an army tank. To the state, the evidence against Gulen and his followers 1 year since the coup attempt is clear. Yvette McCullough, The Newsmakers.
Okay, to discuss this, I'm joined now by history professor Adam McConnell. He also writes about Turkish news and politics. We've also got Hakkı Öcal, a political editor at Turkey's Milliyet newspaper, and in Ankara, Özlem Çağlar Yılmaz. She's the coordinator at the Association for Liberal Thinking. Thanks, all of you, for joining us. Hakkı Öcal, let me begin with you first. It was quite clear early on that Gulen members were involved in that failed coup. 1 year on, is it abundantly clear that that movement drove the coup and they were the main player?
Yes, it is. I mean, personally, I have no doubt or any qualms about it. Again, this is not your regular organization. It is not an NGO. It is a religious cult. When I utter the word cult, I immediately remember Camp Davidian, Branch Davidian people. And you get orders from one person and you do whatever he is asking you to do. That is what is done. only problem with this knowledge is that it couldn't become, during the year, an information that can be submitted to the courts in the United States or to the people in Europe.
But okay, but I mean, and sorry to interrupt you so early on, but David Koresh and his cult didn't build schools and hospitals and so on around the world, right? So this is where we go into it. People from the outside who might experience this group in their country say, we see them doing interfaith dialogue, they build schools, they build hospitals. You're telling us they wanted to overthrow a government. Tell me the difference between that kind of international outreach and a group that would want to do a coup here.
Again, in the first years, before the coup or anything that we now know, were known, I used to compare this organization to Opus Dei or Jesuits in Europe.
Right.
They are doing good work
But there's another side to the coin.
But there's another side. I mean, I personally, like 1 million other people, defended the rights of graduates of religious seminaries to attend the universities, regular universities. And also I defended the right of people from any sect, any religious sect in Turkey, to become a policeman or officer in the army or anything. But I always assumed, like everyone else, that when you join the army, you were getting your orders from your commanders within this hierarchy of the army. But now we know that they used to get their orders from one, say, high school teacher in some remote town.
That was the ABI? Or
that was the ABI, that was the
right.
structure of this organization. We know all these now. We documented them. In the courts, I mean, there are testimonies, there are other prosecutors' papers, but they are not in the form and shape that could be accepted in the law of court in Europe, in the United States.
Understand. Okay, so Özlem Çağlar Yilmaz, tell me how this movement managed to infiltrate the state on so many levels to the extent that they almost pulled off a coup d'etat. How did that happen?
Well, this group has been active and chosen to infiltrate in the bureaucratic state organizations for about 30 years. So to understand them, it's important to understand the political system of Turkey. So if you reflect the problem in Turkey or the struggle between two groups, or even, as they say, between two Islamist religious groups, that would be very misleading. So Turkey had a bureaucratic tutelage mechanism. After the Republican revolution, we did not have a competitive liberal democratic system. So the competitive political field had been surrounded by the bureaucratic institutions, and to restrict civil liberties, individual liberties, in freedom of entrepreneurship and free markets as well. So instead of going to a competitive system, for any group, it is much more preferable to infiltrate in the bureaucratic mechanisms. So this Gülenist group wanted to replace the earlier bureaucratic elites. They did not want to be open, transparent, and to go into competition with the other political groups. So on the contrary to what they say, as if they had defended civil society, rule of law, or about to say tolerance, on the contrary, they preferred to hide themselves.
Right.
So we cannot claim any ideology, any political ideology to this Gülenist group. So they can change their, the members of this Gülenist group can change their identity as being a liberal, a socialist, a social democrat, a nationalist, a hardcore socialist. So this had been their method to infiltrate in not only in the bureaucratic institutions. So Hakkı Öcal and you also mentioned about the service institutions, the education institutions, hospitals, etc. They had been their mask, their civil mask, to hide their real aim, which is to be an intelligence crime organization indeed.
Right.
So they collected intelligence information from everyone, from every civil institution, from the academic institutions, from the universities. Right. So say in a university, say a Kemalist hegemony could be present. And so Gülenists preferred to be with the Kemalists.
Understood.
So say in an institution, socialists had been popular or dominant. Okay.
Yeah. So they adapted.
Preferred.
Yeah. So they adapted.
So the other issue that
So if it allow me to just come in, I just want to go to Adam because there's something interesting here. So, because from the Turkish society, and my apologies, Özlem, from the Turkish society's perspective, people here generally know how they work, but there's been a frustration, Adam, because there seems to be this disconnect as Turkey tries to articulate the threat, particularly, Adam, to, say, the United States when they want the extradition of Fethullah Gülen. Because it's hard to have hard evidence that maybe there was a call from Pennsylvania, right? There's no paper trail, there's no document or whatever. In order to meet these extradition requirements, the United States is saying, give us something hard. They might not, at the moment, consider it enough. Whereas we see Turkish politicians tearing their hair out of frustrations here saying, aren't we giving you enough? Tell me about that disconnect, Adam.
Well, I think the disconnect comes from the fact that this cult, of course, has both a public and a secret face. When I first came to Turkey 20 years ago, as a teacher, I began to work in the educational sector. And immediately I came into contact, because I was working in a school that was apparently connected to Gülen's organization. And I came into contact with the Gülenist reality in the education sector. And at the same time, of course, there was a public perception of this group as, being an educational group, being involved in, this sort of very positive sector and trying to do good works. And then, of course, outside of the country, establishing schools in various countries. But at the same time, as Özlem explained, there's another side that, yes, there was this public face. They were trying to, spread education, spread Turkish culture. But then, at the same time, they were infiltrating state institutions. And this has been going on for more than 30 years. We know for a fact at least 30 years. And there are suggestions, there are claims that it is even further than that. And this, of course, is something that's, with this contrast between a public and a hidden face, it's very difficult to come up with solid, concrete information that can show that this is true.
And that's interesting then, because, and we're going to touch on it a little bit later on, because how do you prove that somebody is a Gülenist and they might be involved? And this is where it gets tricky, and we're going to talk about it in a moment. Özlem, I want to ask you, what would the country have looked like 1 year on had they succeeded on that night?
Oh, well, that could be really terrible, because the Gülenist group is actually against the diversity. They are against the diversity in all fields. So first of all, real liberals, classical liberals, Democrats would be the real threats. And those journalists, businessmen, academicians would all be prosecuted if they were not even killed, I could say. Because first of all, I would like to point that not in the recent years, like in 20 years ago, particularly the Anatolian conservative religious people, they had already noticed these Gülenist people would like to unify the interpretation of Islam as whatever they would like to interpret. That's why the plurality among the religious groups in Anatolia, they had distracted themselves from the Gülenist group. So those liberals and Democrats had realized, particularly during the Gezi protests, that the people, the policemen in the field, and those people in the field, the pro-ox in the field, were actually led by the Gülenists. So we could observe these through their publications in their daily newspapers. So following the other operations, the probe allegations, the Turkish people had been very clear about their involvement in the bureaucratic institutions. I should tell you that during the tapes, but coming to the 30 March local elections, particularly until that time, everyone was very scared. Everyone was scared from Gülenists. People were very afraid. Even civil people, local people, academicians were really afraid to criticize Gülen.
Okay.
But after the victory in the local elections in 30 March, people had gained confidence to criticize Gülen and the movement.
Okay.
So I would like to tell you that on the 15 July, even if Erdogan did not call people, people would react and pour in the streets.
Right.
Because I would like to tell you, it is not only to defend Erdogan or AK party, because people enjoyed the civil liberties, the liberalization of the country, and the prosperity that we gained in the recent 20 years of time.
Understood.
This government had started the confrontation and the reforms.
Okay.
So that's why people had been very alert to this group.
Okay.
So I would like to emphasize the plurality and the recognition of the people in Turkey.
Understood. Özlem, it's been great having you on the program. And this is where I'm going to thank you. We're going to take a short break now. Hakkı and Adam, you stick around. But Özlem Çağlar Yılmaz, pleasure having you on the program. Thanks so much.